The night was restless. Rain fell like a warning, steady, cold, unforgiving drumming against the old church roof, as if trying to wake something buried inside it. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it a strange, uneasy silence. Inside, the church stood still, sacred, untouched, until bang. A sudden knock shattered the quiet. Then another bang. Urgent, desperate. Father Michael stirred, his breath catching slightly as he turned toward the heavy wooden door. At this hour, no one ever came. For a moment he hesitated. Then, slowly, he walked forward. Each step echoed louder than it should. The knocking stopped. Silence. He reached for the handle, paused, then opened the door. A man stood there, drenched, shaking, his face hidden beneath a dark hood, water dripping from its edge. His chest rose and fell like he had been running from something, or someone, or maybe from himself. The priest studied him carefully. "Can I help you, my son?" The man didn't look up, didn't move then, in a voice barely above a whisper, broken, heavy, almost swallowed by the storm. "Father." A pause, a breath. "I've done something terrible." Thunder rumbled across the sky. The man slowly lifted his head, just enough for the weight of his words to land. "I killed them." Another pause. Years ago. The world seemed to stop. A flash of lightning tore across the darkness, and then blackness. Only the sound of thunder remained. Morning came gently, as if the storm had never happened. Soft light filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the empty church in quiet colors. The world outside slowly returned to life, but inside, everything remained calm, almost untouched. Father Michael was already awake. He always was. Kneeling at the altar, hands clasped, eyes closed, he whispered his morning prayers, not hurried, not distracted, but deep, intentional. Like every word mattered. This was his life. Simple, quiet, devoted. By mid-morning, the church doors were open. A few locals trickled in, an old woman with tired eyes, a young man searching for direction, a mother holding her child close. And Father Michael met each of them the same way, with patience, with kindness, with a calm that made people feel safe. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were gentle, but carried weight, the kind of weight that only comes from someone who has seen pain and chosen peace anyway. To the town, he was more than a priest. He was a refuge. But when the day faded, and the last footsteps left the church, the silence returned. And so did something else. That night, inside his small room behind the chapel, Father Michael sat alone. No congregation, no responsibilities, just stillness. He reached for a worn book on his table, then stopped. His eyes drifted instead to a small framed photograph beside it, a man and a woman. Smiling. Warm, kind, familiar. His parents. The room grew heavier. For a moment, just a moment, the calm in his face shifted. Something deeper surfaced, something unspoken. A memory, a loss, a weight he never shared. His fingers brushed lightly against the frame. Then he exhaled, slowly. And just like that, the expression disappeared. Composed again, controlled. He stood, turned off the light, and stepped away, leaving the photo behind, watching in silence. The storm had not passed, but it only grew quieter, as if the night itself was listening. Inside the church, the air felt heavier now. The doors were shut, but the echo of that knock still lingered in the silence. Father Michael led the man toward the confessional. "Sit," he said gently, but the man didn't move at first. He glanced around nervously, his breath uneven, his hands trembling beneath the shadow of his hood. "I don't have much time," he muttered. His voice carried urgency and fear. The priest studied him carefully. "Confession is not about time," Father Michael replied softly. "It's about truth." A long pause followed. Then, slowly, the man stepped forward and entered the confessional. He kept his face turned away, buried deep in the darkness. Even seated, he pulled his hood lower, as if hiding from more than just the priest, or perhaps from himself. On the other side, Father Michael settled in. The wooden screen between them felt thinner than usual. Too thin. "Whenever you're ready," the priest said, Silence only, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Then I've carried this. The man began, his voice cracking under the weight of it. He stopped. Try it again. I've carried this for 15 years. A shaky breath followed. I can't breathe anymore. The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Father Michael felt it. Something in his chest tightened. Though he didn't yet know why, still he remained composed. What burdens us in darkness, he said quietly, must be brought into the light. The man let out a weak, almost broken laugh. You don't understand, he whispered. Another pause, longer this time. Then finally, I need you to listen, and not stop me, no matter what I say. The priest hesitated. Just for a second, a feeling, unfamiliar and uneasy, crept in, but he pushed it aside. This was his duty. I'm here, Father Michael said, and the night seemed to lean closer. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy, expectant, until the man finally exhaled, long and unsteady. I wasn't always like this, he began. His voice had changed, now less guarded, more distant, like he was no longer in the room, but somewhere far behind him, reliving it. I used to believe things would get better. A faint, bitter pause, but they didn't. The rain outside softened, almost fading into the background of his memory. I had nothing, he continued. No money, no help, no one waiting for me anywhere. His fingers clenched tightly in his lap, and after a while, something inside me just broke. Father Michael listened in silence, his posture still, but his attention sharper now. I got angry, the man said, at everything, at everyone, at a world that seemed to move on without me. Another pause. I told myself I didn't have a choice. His voice dropped lower, that if I didn't take, I wouldn't survive. The priest's eyes closed briefly, not in judgment, but in understanding, or perhaps concern. So I started small, the man admitted. Little things at first, things I could justify. A dry, hollow chuckle escaped him. It's funny how easy it is to cross a line when you convince yourself it was never there. The church creaked softly as the wind brushed against its walls. Then came the shift. One night, he said more quietly now, I saw a house. He swallowed. Lights on. People inside. Normal, peaceful. Everything I wasn't. His breathing grew heavier. I told myself it would be quick. Just go in, take something, leave. Another pause, longer, more fragile. But, he whispered, it didn't go that way. The words lingered in the air, unfinished, but full of weight. On the other side of the screen, Father Michael's hand tightened slightly against the wood. Something about the way the man spoke, the hesitation, the regret. It was no longer just a story. It was a door, slowly opening. And whatever lay behind it was getting closer. The air inside the confessional grew still, as if even the walls were listening. The man didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was quieter, heavier, like each word had to fight its way out. They were home, he said slowly. A man and a woman. A pause. They weren't afraid at first. Father Michael's brow tightened slightly, though he said nothing. I remember thinking it would be easy, the man continued. Just take what I came for and leave. His breathing became uneven, but they saw me. Another pause, and everything changed. The faint sound of thunder rolled in the distance. They didn't scream, he whispered, almost in disbelief. They didn't fight. A shaky breath followed. They talked to me. Silence. They asked me what I wanted. Like I wasn't a threat. Like I was just lost. The man's voice cracked. They even offered to help me. On the other side, Father Michael's fingers slowly curled against his robe. Something stirred, something familiar. They said I didn't have to do this. The man continued, that whatever I needed, they could find a way. A long, fragile pause, but I didn't listen. His voice dropped to a whisper. I couldn't. The weight of those words settled deep into the room. They were kind, he said, more softly now. Too kind. Another breath, unsteady, broken. They didn't deserve it. The priest's chest tightened. A faint memory brushed against the edge of his mind. Faces, voices. Something just out of reach. They were good people. The words echoed, not just in the confessional, but somewhere deeper. Father Michael swallowed slowly, his calm beginning to crack beneath the surface. He didn't know why. Not yet. But something about this story, the way it was told, the way it felt, it wasn't just disturbing. It was familiar. And that realization was beginning to unsettle him. The silence that followed felt different, heavier, like something unseen had just entered the room. The man exhaled slowly, as though he had reached a part of the story he could no longer avoid. It happened, he began, his voice low and uncertain. In this town. Father Michael didn't move, but something inside him did. A quiet shift, a subtle tightening. The rain outside soft to a faint whisper, as if the world itself was leaning in. The man continued. I didn't stay long after that night, he said. I ran, left everything behind. A pause, but no matter where I went, it followed me. His breathing grew heavier again. I tried to forget, he added. Tried to convince myself it was just another mistake. Just another night. Another pause, longer, more deliberate. But it wasn't. The priest's fingers slowly curled against the edge of his seat. Something was building, something he couldn't yet name, but couldn't ignore. It was 15 years ago, the man said quietly, and just like that, everything stopped. The words didn't echo, they settled deep. Final 15 years. Father Michael's grip tightened. His knuckles turned pale against the wood. A memory sharp, sudden flashed across his mind. Lights, voices lost. He drew in a slow breath. But it didn't steady him. On the other side, the man spoke again, unaware of what was unfolding just inches away. I heard later. People talked about it, he said. Said the whole town was shaken. The priest's jaw clenched slightly. His heart was no longer calm. It was searching, racing through fragments of the past. I didn't know their names back then. The man added. Another pause, careful, measured. But I remember the house. The room felt smaller now. Tighter, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Father Michael's hand gripped the chair even harder. Because somewhere deep within him, a truth was beginning to rise. Uninvited, unavoidable, and once it surfaced, nothing would ever be the same. The words lingered, heavy, unavoidable. 15 years, this town, a kind couple. Father Michael's grip on the chair tightened, but his mind was no longer in the confessional. It had gone back, far back to a night he had tried so hard to bury. Flashing lights, red and blue, cutting through the darkness. Younger version of him stood barefoot outside a small house. Confusion in his eyes, fear tightening his chest. Voices spoke around him, but none of them made sense, until one did, soft, careful. Finally, they're gone. The world had shifted in that moment. Not loudly, not violently, but completely. The memory faded. But the feeling remained. Heavy, cold, unfinished, back in the present. Father Michael's breathing slowed, but it wasn't calm. It was controlled, forced. His eyes remained fixed ahead, though the wooden screen between him and the man now felt like the thinnest barrier in the world, because the truth was no longer hiding. It stood right in front of him. And it was speaking. I never stayed to find out who they were, the man continued, his voice distant. I didn't want to know. A pause, but over the years, things find their way back to you. Father Michael said nothing. He couldn't. His silence now carried weight, meaning, recognition. I heard people talk, the man added quietly. About the couple. About what happened. Another pause, more fragile this time. And their son? The priest's chest tightened. I heard he became a priest. Silence, not empty, but full, heavy, unbearable. Time seemed to stretch, each second pressing harder than the last. On one side of the screen sat a man confessing his past. On the other sat the past itself, breathing, listening, and now awake. The silence did not pass. It deepened. Father Michael sat motionless, but inside him, everything was shifting. Two voices rose within him, quiet, but powerful. One, steady and familiar, the voice of his calling. Forgive, show mercy, guide the lost back to the light. But the other was older, raw, and healed. Justice. The word echoed differently in his chest. not as a principle, but as a wound. His fingers slowly loosened from the chair, only to tighten again, this time not from fear, but from conflict. On the other side, the man shifted slightly, unaware of the storm he had awakened. "I've tried to live with it," he said weakly. "Tried to move on, but it doesn't leave." His voice cracked. "It's like, no matter what I do, I'm still there." A pause then, more quietly in that house. On that night, Father Michael closed his eyes briefly, not to escape, but to hold himself together. The man inhaled sharply, as if gathering the courage for one final question. "Father," the word trembled, "do you think God can forgive someone like me?" The question hung in the air, simple, yet heavier than everything that had come before it. For a moment, there was no answer, only the sound of breathing, uneven, human. Then slowly, Father Michael opened his eyes. His voice, when it came, was no longer as steady as before. It carried something new, something fragile. "Do you?" he began, then paused, his throat tightening slightly. "Do you truly repent?" The words were soft, but they held weight. Not just as a priest's question, but as a son. On the other side, the man broke. A quiet sob escaped him first, then another. His composure collapsed under the weight he had carried for years. "I do," he whispered, struggling to breathe. "I do. I regret it every day." His voice cracked completely now. "I would take it back if I could. I swear I would." Tears fell freely, unseen, but undeniable. "I don't want to be this person anymore." The confession was no longer just words. It was pain. It was truth, and it was laid bare before the one man who had every reason not to forgive. The man's sobs slowly faded, leaving behind a fragile, trembling silence. Father Michael sat still. Too still. The weight of everything, every word, every memory, every truth had finally settled into one unavoidable moment. There was no distance left. No doubt, only reality. He drew in a slow breath, and then he spoke, softly, carefully, but with a weight that changed everything. "Those people." A pause. His voice trembled just enough to reveal what lay beneath. "You killed." Another pause, longer this time. "Were my parents." Silence, not the kind that passes, the kind that stays. The man stopped breathing for a moment, completely still. As if the world itself had just collapsed around him. "No," he whispered faintly. But the truth didn't move. It stood between them, unshaken. For the first time since he arrived, the man's hands slowly rose to his hood. He hesitated, then pulled it back. His face, tired, worn, marked by years of guilt, was finally visible. And now there was nothing left to hide. On the other side, Father Michael looked at him, not as a priest, not fully, but as a son. Two men. Bound by one night. One loss. One irreversible truth. Time stretched. Neither spoke. Neither looked away. Then finally the man's voice returned, barely a whisper. Then he swallowed hard. "You should turn me in." The words were not forced. They were surrendered, accepted. Father Michael said nothing. Slowly, he stood. The movement felt heavy, deliberate, like every step carried the weight of a decision that could not be undone. He stepped out of the confessional. The man remained seated, watching, waiting. The priest walked toward the large wooden doors of the church. Each step echoed in the silence, closer, closer, until he stood before it. His hand rose slowly and hovered over the handle. Everything hung in that moment. Justice, forgiveness, pain, faith. His hand trembled slightly, then stopped. A long pause. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he turned slowly back toward the man. Their eyes met again. This time, there were tears in Father Michael's eyes. Not weakness, but something deeper, human. He spoke quietly. "What happens next?" "A breath is between you, me." Another pause. "And God." The words settled into the air, final, yet unfinished. Outside a church bell began to ring. Slow, steady, echoing through the night. And somewhere in the distance, faint sound, a siren, or maybe just the wind. The priest turned back to the door. His hand moved again. This time it pressed Against a handle. The door creaked open. Just slightly. Enough to let the outside world in. Or something out. We never see what he chooses. Only the door slowly opening as the sound of the bell continues. And then darkness, silence, nothing more.